Welcome to Stories from the Center of the Universe, the podcast about the human experience.
Ray Hedrick, welcome to the Center of the Universe.
It is great to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
I love football, basketball, and baseball, and you are now the third of my trifecta of getting Randolph Macon coaches for football, basketball, and baseball. So I really appreciate you being here.
Well, it's good company to be in. Those are some of my closest friends, but also I admire them as much as anybody in the industry. They are hardworking. That is Coach Arruza, Coach Merkel, and it's exciting to be on a similar level to them in this case.
And it pays off to be that intense and that serious about what you guys do, because all three programs have done extremely well.
Well, all three of us are relationship-based coaches. We value our players. We certainly like the idea of winning and want to win at a high level, but the relationship piece, which I think is why we're drawn and have stayed, particularly Pedro and I, at Randolph Macon for so long, because of our chance to impact students on a personal level, not just an athletic level. So good group of men, and excited to be part of what they've done, the groundwork they've laid ahead of me here.
Yeah, it's really fun to be an Ashlander, frankly, and having all of that really successful sports going on a few miles away.
No, it's being on campus. There's a lot of good energy. We have an unbelievable department. And I know that the focus here has been on football and basketball and the success we're having in baseball, but there are other sports across all the seasons that have done well. Women's volleyball has been a constant in our league, and on a national level, and what Bill Rogers has done. Softball is exceptional. Kevin Proffitt, who is also an alum of Randolph Macon, lives in Ashland as well, and what he's done with the softball program and the support he has from guys like Dana Wood and whose brother was Randolph Macon, Billy Wood, and lives in Ashland. I mean, it's just I'm remiss if I talk about what lacrosse has done, both men's and women's, and soccer. I mean, it's just a really good time to be part of the fabric of Randolph Macon, and of course, when the athletic programs are competitive, the students are more excited, and enrollment tends to increase. We're in a really good spot. We're very lucky.
It's a powerful, positive vibe
all across campus.
Yeah.
All across campus, the faculty, the staff, the administration. We get amazing support there from Bob Lindgren and the other administrators on campus, and it all works together. It's been a pretty powerful experience to this point.
Well, and for such a small school, I mean, it's the intensification is it's got to be wild.
Well, what's amazing to me is how people view us on a national level. Probably in the same way I view some of these programs from where I sit. Wisconsin Whitewater is a good example. Wisconsin Whitewater is a machine to me. In a state where, at least in baseball, they don't have Division I baseball in Wisconsin.
They
do not. They have football, they have basketball. Big Ten, we are all aware of that. But they do not have baseball offered in Division I and at the Division I level in the state of Wisconsin.
Not even the University of.
No. Madison does not have baseball.
That is wild to me.
So in baseball, it's a machine. Wisconsin Whitewater, Wisconsin Oshkosh, Wisconsin Stevens Point, lacrosse, all of them, but Whitewater in particular. And if you look at Wisconsin Whitewater and their tradition, football, basketball, baseball, a majority of their sports are high level. And so we start to see Randolph Macon compared to schools like Whitewater. We were the only athletic department in the entire country at the Division III level that had national tournament wins in football, men's basketball, and baseball this year.
Yeah.
And got to at least the Sweet 16 in the case of basketball, 8 for us, 4 for football. And it's remarkable to think Randolph Macon, and nationally people look at us as a machine. And I'm just on that campus every day going, well, if we could have a little more money to do this or a little bit more money to do that. But the brand of Randolph Macon nationally has grown so much because of the hard work of the coaches in our department, the two men you mentioned, and all the other coaches, both in men's and women's sports.
Well, and I'll tell you, I grew up in Ashland, and basketball, Randolph Macon was a basketball school. And not to take anything away from prior coaches, but Pedro has taken the football program to a new level, and you've done that in baseball as well. And I think Kevin Proffitt, to your point, softball, and the coach for the volleyball team has clearly done that too.
Right. Well, but we stand on the shoulders of those men and women that came before us. You've got coaches like Ted Keller, Hal Nunley, Paul Webb, Carol Hay, Rachel Anderson.
Pretty big names.
Big names for their times, right? And they kind of set the standard in place for us so that now, the coaches that we've mentioned have the opportunities they have. But it's no question there is a legacy at Randolph Macon that Pedro will just fit into his niche now, and Kevin Proppett will fit into his niche, and Lindsey Burke will fit into her niche as Carol LaHaye did, and it's just it's impressive. Again, I being on that campus every day, you take it for granted, but then you go out and recruit and you go out and serve on committees and in other capacities on a national level, and the brand is impressive. People just look at it and go, Randolph Macon, wow, you guys have something there. I'm like, well, it's really not as big as you think, but like with a Whitewater, again, I use them as a comparison. They got over 10,000 students there. It is a state-run university.
That's a massive school.
It's part of the UW system, no different than Madison. I worked at UNC Pembroke prior to moving to Ashland, and Pembroke was part of the UNC system. So Chapel Hill and NC State and East Carolina and Appalachian. Whitewater's the same. I mean, that's that UW, that Wisconsin school system, as is Madison. So, I look at them and I think, well, this we don't even compare. We shouldn't even be in the same. And CNU is a little bit that way. Christopher Newport. But here we are, and again, across the board, the athletic department is thriving.
All right, let's go back to the beginning. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Northern Virginia. I went to I grew up in Springfield, but interestingly enough, the house I grew up in had kids that went to West Springfield High School, went to Robinson High School, and then I went to Annandale High School. Wow. So it was a Springfield mailing address, but I actually went to Annandale High School. And the school that's probably closest to my childhood residence is Lake Braddock, and that's where it's districted now. So that school, that home, has had a lot of different connections to schools. But I grew up in Northern Virginia. Springfield, played North Springfield Little League baseball, Annandale Falls Church baseball as I got into 13 and up. Braddock Road Youth Club basketball, and again, went to Edgar Allan Poe Middle School, Ravensworth Elementary to Edgar Allan Poe.
I didn't realize Poe had such a name in Northern Virginia. I really didn't.
Yeah, at Edgar Allan Poe. Now there it was only 7th and 8th grade. So I went, K through 6 at Ravensworth Elementary, which was my neighborhood elementary school in Ravensworth Farm, and then went to Edgar Allan Poe for 7th and 8th grade, and transitioned over to Annandale, which at the time was a football power. In the 70s, right around the time of Remember the Titans,
sure,
and in that era of TC Williams football, Bob Hartage was the coach at Annandale and had a string of state championships in the mid to late 70s, and was still the coach when I started there in the late 80s. And Dick Adams then took over the football program and won consecutive state championships in 94, 95, I believe.
Yeah,
and we were a competitive high school baseball program, but that was we were competing with the James Robinson high schools, and they had several professional players there, and George Marshall High School, George C. Marshall, that had several professional players. So we just were a little smaller entity when it came to baseball, but Northern Virginia is my home.
And Northern Virginia has a lot of good baseball teams at the high school level.
No question.
Yeah,
no question. I mean, Madison High School right now is one of the premier schools in that, and they've had a coach there, Mark Jorman, goes by Pudge, but he's been running that program probably for the last 20 years, if I'm not mistaken, and done it at a high level. And when I was in school, we had Danny Greil at Lake Braddock, we had Ron Tugwell at West Springfield, we had Tom Verbanek at Fairfax. We had some really, really good coaches that were legendary at their time. And now, Mark Jorman has kind of put himself in that role at Madison High School. But a lot of the schools have started to build up to the western part of the county now, Fairfax County, and even into Loudoun County. And you're starting to see, more families move out there and stronger programs out in that area now, and less, in that Annandale, Lake Braddock, Falls Church area that I grew up in.
I'm a little fascinated by the fact that you went to Edgar Allan Poe Middle School, and the fact that your K through 6 school was Ravensworth, and it sounds like it was named after a farm, but Ravensworth, I mean, Edgar Allan Poe,
the Raven.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's the most famous poem he ever wrote. Maybe the most famous poem ever written in the Mid-Atlantic, probably.
Yeah. Sadly you're not talking to the most book smart guy here that has a great history on Edgar Allan Poe and his writings and his and all the things that has done from a literature standpoint. But no, I do know that Edgar Allan Poe, the Raven. Ravensworth Farm, it was my understanding growing up there, was just a farm that had been sold, is the case so often now, and just a neighborhood developed there in the late 40s and early 50s that my grandparents built in and raised their family, and I was raised in that same home. But I don't know that there was a connection between Ravensworth and Edgar Allan Poe Middle School, to be quite frank, because they were probably a good 15 miles apart.
Yeah, it's probably just a weird coincidence.
Yeah, maybe, or I'm just completely off, and maybe somebody from Ravensworth will respond to this and say, well, that kid really was taught nothing growing up in that neighborhood. He
At least not the history
of
where he was.
Right.
Yeah, it's you mentioned Lake Braddock. I have to just throw this in here. My freshman roommate in college was the salutatorian from Lake Braddock.
Wow.
Yeah, he's a wicked smart guy. He slept a lot, though.
Did he? Yeah. So smart, but he had to give himself a rest.
Yeah, he was burning his brain too much, I think.
Well, the names that I remember growing up there, Hubert Davis was at Lake Braddock when I was there.
I forget he's from here.
Yeah, Hubert Davis, the head coach at Chapel Hill now for men's basketball, and Mia Hamm played soccer at Lake Braddock.
Wow.
The one of the trailblazers for women's soccer.
Some would argue the best women's soccer player in this country.
Again,
anyway.
they're a bit older than I am, but as a child and a younger student in that area, I vividly remember going to the gym and watching Hubert Davis play, as I'm waiting to play Braddock Road Youth Club basketball games. I remember Hubert Davis. That was a big deal. His sister played there as well. And then Kara Lawson in women's basketball.
Mm-hmm.
She's from West Springfield. She went to West Springfield High School. And I'm sure Grant Hill, of course, is from South Lakes. I don't have any good Grant Hill stories. But as we talk about Lake Braddock, Mia Hamm and Hubert Davis are the two names that I vividly remember as a kid growing up and hearing all about their accolades athletically.
Yeah, huge names.
Yeah, huge.
Your parents did what for a living? Were they government?
My grandfather, I was raised by my grandparents.
Okay.
So my mom had me at a relatively young age and so had to lean on my grandparents for support. So my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and when he
So you were raised by a World War II veteran.
I was.
That's unusual.
It was a unique experience at the time because there was a bit of a disconnect from my age and
sure.
But looking back on it, some really fond memories, and my grandfather and I were always very close. It was just, when I was, he was 58 years old when I was born. So, he got older as I got older, and just the connection and the activities and whatnot, that are typical for a father-son or a mother and son that, were a little less engaging for me just because I had older my grandparents were the ones there, but my grandfather was a World War II veteran, and he just did civil service, contractual work for the government. By the time I can remember, he was retired.
Yeah.
And but was very proud of his service up until the day he died. He was on a destroyer. He was a gunner for the USS Sigourney, and he would wear his jacket, he'd wear his hat, he'd go to all the reunions that they would have. So I grew to appreciate that part of his life as I got older. And my grandmother was always in the background, just cooking meals and making snacks for trips and doing laundry and just and supporting in a different role. But I was fortunate enough to have them both move down here with me later in life,
good.
Was able to help them kind of through their final years and support them as best I could in the way in which, as a thank you for the way in which they supported me at such a young age.
Was it just the three of you in the house?
Just the three of us.
Wow.
My mom was part of my life, but not quite to the level that my grandparents were, and my mom has since passed away. So my dad lives down in North Carolina and is successful, and he and I are in contact quite frequently, but just don't have that bond that I had with my grandparents. And it was my mom's parents that raised me, and a big reason why I'm in the position I am, because of their support and the direction they gave me in my life.
How old was your grandfather how old were you when your grandfather passed?
So he, in 2009, September 3rd, 2009. So I was 34 years old.
Yeah, it's you're the only person I know in your generation that was raised by a World War II veteran. That's really unusual. Really lucky in some ways, and maybe sad in others.
Yeah, I was lucky, and again, I didn't as a young as an adolescent and through my high school and even my early college years, I didn't really value that and what stories he had and what experiences he had. But fortunately, we got past all that adolescent crap.
Yeah,
and I wasn't a bad kid. I just was a kid. And I just didn't value what I had in front of me. But fortunately, he was around enough in my early adult years and saw me through college, was there at Randolph Macon when I graduated from college, helped me financially as I got into the coaching industry, helped me buy my wife an engagement ring because I wasn't making a lot of money. And then was able to be there at my wedding and see the birth of our oldest daughter.
That's really cool.
And just was. So he was there for big life moments and eventually moved in with us. And my grandmother ended up moving down here too as she battled dementia. So, it was, he passed much earlier than my grandmother did. Again, she had dementia. So he passed in 2009. She passed in 2016. Was able to be part of some real interesting life events and unforgettable life events with my grandfather that I'm glad I was able to, because I really didn't appreciate who he was and what I had when I was 15, 17, sure. 21 years old.
No 15-year-old appreciates grandpa or grandma
or mom or dad for that matter.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So I was lucky. I was lucky to be able to have those later years with him as I got married, started a family, and even had a child, and he was able to be part of that experience. And sometimes uncomfortably, because he was living in the house and he was set in his ways, and my wife was a good sport to help me manage those situations. But
your wife was a great sport.
Yeah, she was. We still tell stories today about when we first moved to the greater Richmond area, and I worked at Randolph Macon before my wife Sheree became the executive director for Hanover Safe Place. We lived in Henrico County, and that's where my grandfather lived with us. And we had our daughter in 2006, and he was staying with us frequently, just battling some health issues. And he would just we still tell stories about he'd have his pill dispenser, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
And it had 17 pills per day.
Yes, but he would struggle to get them out of the dispenser, and they'd fall on the floor. And we had a newborn or a toddler, and I called him Gar, which is my son is named Garner in his honor. And I have no reason why I called him Gar other than I uttered it out apparently when I was a toddler, and he was like, "Yep, that's who I am. I'm Gar." So that stuck.
That's how we do it in my family. Yeah.
It was just something I blurted out.
Yeah.
And but he would spill his pills on the floor. We had dogs. We had Maris, and it was like
you had a 3-rig service.
Yeah, it was like, and my wife would be so patient. Gar, you got to watch out for your pills, and you can't drop them on the floor. Oh, they'll be fine. They won't hurt anybody. And, he would always, at that time, it was tough for him to go out and drive independently. So he'd always ask us, mainly my wife, to drive him places. And one time I took my nephew and my brother-in-law, a friend of mine was a groundskeeper at Old Shea Stadium. So I took them up when my nephew was younger to see the Yankees Mets 3-game series. This is probably 05, 06.
Yeah.
And my wife must have been 06, but my wife was taking care of my grandfather at the house, and she was outside with the dogs in our home, and somehow slipped or fell or tripped, and she hit her head on the deck and cut her head open. I mean, slightly, but enough that it needed stitches. And she walked in the house, and my grandfather said, "Are we going to the store soon?" And she's like, "Gar, I cut myself. I think I might need to go get stitches." You'll be fine. Just rub some dirt on it. I got to go to Kroger, And he was from New England, so he had that thick, Ka and Pack and Kroger. And she was like, I remember being up at Shea Stadium, and my wife just was in tears. She was like, I just literally cut my head open, and your grandfather still wants me to drive him to Kroger. I'm sorry, Sheree. I'm sorry. But, those are funny stories that we can tell now.
Now we're funny to tell.
Well, and, we'd have friends over, and the way our house was laid out, we'd be sitting in the living room, and he had a room downstairs, and the kitchen was off of the living room, and, he would walk in his underwear, and "Don't mind me, I'm just getting some water." And we'd say, "Well, we have people over," I mean, just living his best life. But I was very lucky, and I'm lucky to sit here and tell those stories now and laugh about it, and just, I mean, again, my mom was 8 days 18 when she had me, and wasn't ready to raise a child, and so for them to kind of take me in, and there were times where my mom would be involved and do what she could, but my grandparents were the steady. Both of them were the steady, and they would always make sure that I was where I needed to be when I needed to be there. They always signed me up for sports. They always cooked me good meals. They always let me have friends over. They tried to make it the best experience they could, even for the age gap. They'd already raised 2 kids. Yeah. So I was lucky for sure. But both my grandparents worked in civil service. My grandfather did that after he served in World War II. In the Pacific.
Yeah, it sounds like your grandfather was very proud of his service, as he should be.
Unbelievably proud.
Yeah. Well, and he probably had friends from those days where he just. Yeah, I mean, hopefully he stayed in touch with a lot of
He did.
guys.
Well, he went to reunions. I remember he would go away for 3-5 days, whatever. I was young. I didn't pay attention. But I have pictures of reunions that he went to where they all wore their, I call them bowling jackets, but they're silk jackets that were, nice and shiny.
Yeah.
And they had their ship name on it.
They love those jackets. They had to.
And then they had the hats with the big patch on it with their ship and their number. Mm-hmm. And it's, again, I don't mean to be remiss over the information that's on there, but he wore it proudly, and I have the flag from his burial and his hat in my office at Randolph Macon, because those were along with his, and I still have his jacket. I just don't wear it, but he was very proud of his service and his time on the Sigourney. I have his ring, his Navy ring, and it's got on the inside of his hand. It's worn from where he was holding the machine gun, and when he was the gunner on the destroyer.
That's a lot of wear.
Yeah, a lot of wear.
If you can see it, that's a lot of wear.
Yeah, you can see it. And I don't know that I would know what it was if he hadn't told me what it was, but that was a ring that he would hold the machine gun, and as the Japanese and the kamikazes would be coming in, he'd be shooting them. I mean, it was pretty. As I grew older, I grew to understand that a little bit more and value and appreciate that a lot more.
So he saw a fair amount of action.
He did. Saw a lot of, and several shipmates lost their lives. He had some stories for sure.
Yeah, wild. Yeah, my grandfather was a World War II veteran as well, and I never talked to him about any of it. Yeah.
Well, I don't know at what age that you lost him, but I was lucky. I know how lucky I was, and can value that a lot more. That I had that time from say 22 to 34 to be able to have those conversations with him and just learn a little bit more about him and go through some old files and notes and just pictures and he was very meticulous. My grandfather was, and how he kept information, and which made it easier when he passed because he was very well prepared. He already had a plot up in New England where he grew up, ready, and he'd already taken care of things with the funeral home, and he had all the notes, just very meticulous. And I all I had to do was pick up the phone, and he had all the insurance companies. He had all this laid out. I mean, it was just phone call. I mean, he was all of that stuff. He was very, very, very proud of his organization. And when it came to his war experience and his service in the Navy, he had it all documented. It was he was a Mason. So when we had his service, we had, because as a kid, he'd take me to the Masonic Temple up in Alexandria.
Wow. So
that was kind of cool going there. So just all those different things. It was really, really neat. I was very lucky.
You and I both know Rob Dull. Rob's dad was a World War II veteran. He was a pilot in World War II. And I don't think Rob's dad was as meticulous as your grandfather was. All right, so when you were a kid, you played baseball, played some basketball. Were there some non-sports things that you were into?
I mean, I did chorus. I was in the middle school band. I was more interested in goofing off, I think. In high school, I tell recruits this. My 2 senior superlatives were most mischievous and best sense of humor, or essentially class clown.
Yeah.
I was more worried about everything else and being the center of attention than I was being active. I mean, if I was playing trumpet in the band and I was on the second seat, I would be, cleaning out my spitter on the girl in front of me. Those were the kind of things I did. But I didn't. No. I mean, I joke, if I didn't coach baseball, I really don't know what else I would do. I don't really have a connection. I'm as my wife would tell you, I'm not good around the house. I'm not a handyman. My wife essentially built a deck by herself over the last several months to prepare for my daughter's high school graduation. So yeah, I mean, I know I have good skills in terms of communication and working with people and sales, because I'm in sales essentially at Randolph Macon. But there wasn't much. I always gravitated towards sports, and whether it be basketball, soccer at a young age, baseball. And I played basketball and baseball right up through the beginning stages of high school. But I was in the band. I tried Cub Scout. I did Cub Scouts, and then I got into Boy Scouts. I'm not an outdoorsman. Which is why, the urban areas are a little bit more of my style. The D.C. metro area, the Northern Virginia, the DMV, as they call it. Yeah. I know Ashland is a little bit more rural than what I'm accustomed to. But
where you live now is kind of rural.
It is, but I still have 95. I still have Chick-fil-A and Popeyes and Starbucks and El Azteca and all the go-tos. And I know Virginia Center isn't really a thing anymore, but Short Pump's still there. But that's what I was accustomed to growing up around. But I tried Cub Scouts and once Boy Scouts started going on camping trips and week-long excursions, I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I'm not. So sadly, sports has always been what I've gravitated towards, and being around, competitive environments and just, I'll watch anything. My wife came through the room last night, and I had the Oilers and Panthers on. I'm a Caps fan, but I'm a hockey fan, and it's Game 5 of the Stanley Cup, and it's an elimination game. My wife's like, you don't even like these teams. What are you doing? I'm like, it's just hockey. It's just sports. If it's on, I may not watch cornhole, but if it's sports and it's on, I'm watching it.
Who won the game last night?
Edmonton.
Okay, good.
It was intense. I mean, they had a 3-goal lead twice, and Florida came back with a vengeance, and they ended up winning by 2, but they scored an empty net late. But it was a lot. I mean, there was good energy in the building, and Florida was playing at a high level. So it'll be interesting to watch going back to Edmonton now. It's such a long trip for both those teams.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's, I think, the longest in NHL history when it comes to Stanley Cup finals. So, but, Edmonton's good, and I don't know their roster backwards and forwards like I may have known when I was a little kid, and Gretzky and Messier and Grant Fuhr and some of those names. But I know they're good, and I know they've got Connor McDavid. So
but he's the best in
he
the
seems to
league.
be the best, or one of the best, now that Ovechkin is aged.
All right, so what was it about baseball that became your thing versus, say, basketball?
That's a good question. I played I wasn't good enough to make my high school basketball team at Annandale, and we were by no means elite, but I just wasn't athletic enough, didn't move well enough, wasn't physical enough to play the positions I needed to based on my size. So I just kind of started, playing baseball more and more. Now, back when I played, and I know you're a couple years older than me, but we didn't have all these travel teams and indoor facilities, and we
didn't know anything. And you had one shot to play in front of college coaches at a high school showcase or something along those lines. So I think I just always, my grandfather was a big baseball guy. Grew up in Northern Virginia, or rather, New England. I'm sorry. Grew up in New England, Red Sox through and through. Loved the Red Sox. Ted Williams, a splendid splinter. That was his guy, and along with Bobby Dorr and Mel Parnell and some of those other guys. But loved the Red Sox. So I grew up being around baseball, and at the time we didn't have a team in DC. We would go to exhibition games. It was sad. We'd go to exhibition games at RFK. We'd go to the Old Timers game. We'd go to back then they would have a congressional game, which was really, really cool. So all the congressmen and senators would play Republicans and Democrats. When everyone, somewhat liked each other. So that's what I grew up going to. And then it was a big deal to go to Memorial Stadium to watch the O's. You get on a bus and go over and watch the O's for a field trip or some type of Little League day or something like that. That's just how I kind of grew up, just always going to baseball events. When we'd go to New England, I remember going to Fenway Park and watching Dennis Oil Can Boyd pitch for the Red Sox, and Bill Buckner led the national anthem. He was standing at first base, conducting the national anthem while everyone was singing in the crowd. I just have always kind of been drawn to the game, and I wasn't great as a player, but it was just something that allowed my grandfather and I to connect on a personal level. He was always known for being the team grandfather. And always helping with snacks and helping, communicate. He was the commissioner of leagues growing up, and fall ball and things of that nature. For you?
For me.
Wow.
Just youth leagues. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he, it's just something that connected us. And as I got older, he would show up to all my games. He'd bring in a lawn chair and a little cooler, and he'd just sit as close to behind home plate as he could. And he had his little crackers or little waters or those little juice jugs that we used to have, when we were little. That's just, and everyone just knew him as Gar. There was Gar in the stands, and he would do that even at Randolph Macon back when we'd play. And that was part of the decision to go to Randolph Macon, was the proximity to home, for him to be able to have access to come see a vast majority of my games, within a reasonable distance. He'd always go to 95 to exit 126 and then hop on Route 1. He loved the route on Route 1. He just was a comfortable ride for him, and he just enjoyed seeing the scenery and whatnot at that time on Route 1. So I think it was just him and I, and it was our connectivity in that sport. And I don't know that he ever played it at a very high level, but he was a fan of the game, and
he liked watching his grandson play.
And I just think that was. I mean, he would go sit and watch me play basketball, but it just wasn't the same riding in the truck and going to games, and it just was how we connected, and I just kind of fell in love with the sport.
Fenway, I've been there one time. I think it's the coolest place to play an athletic event. Certainly in this country.
Right.
I've never been to Wrigley, in fairness to Wrigley, but Fenway's a cool park.
Fenway is really neat, and I've had the fortune to take my son there. A couple of years ago, right after the pandemic, we went on a trip, and we drove up to. We started at Yankee Stadium and watched the Yankees Royals, and then we started in Philly. Watched the Phillies and Nationals, and it was like the best game ever. It was 13-12. I think there were 2 grand slams hitting the game. It was awesome.
Oh my God!
We got to meet Larry Boa. It was a cool experience. So we went from Philly to Yankee Stadium for a day game between the Yankees and the Royals, and then had a travel day up to New England and watched the Yankees and Sox on a Saturday.
Wow.
It was neat to be able to take my son and kind of do the same things that I did with my grandfather in that park. So it is a really, really neat park. It is tough to get in and out of. As a kid, you don't pay attention to those things. I remember going in on the T, which is what they call the subway up there, the train, the public transit, the T. So we took the T in and took the T back to wherever my grandfather, I think maybe Peabody, Mass, or I don't know where we parked the car. But when I went up with my son back in, I guess it was must have been the summer of 2021.
When things are just starting to get normal.
We just drove back. We drove right in, literally parked at a gas station right next to Fenway. And, it's growing up in the greater D.C. area, traffic does not typically make me nervous, and I'm usually able to handle the urban adventures of driving in and out of cities. Boston was a little bit intense, but we got through it, and it was fun.
I found New York a little more intense, actually.
Never driven in New York. Don't know that I would manage that well. D.C.'s a piece of cake. Boston was questionable. Philly, I love. I could drive all through Philly, but I cannot. I don't know that I can manage New York.
New York's a nletmare.
Yeah, I may never try that. I may just stay out in Newark or the surrounding areas and in the Meadowlands and just travel in from there.
All right. Let's talk about your path to Randolph Macon. Yeah. So you graduate from Randolph Macon. Well, let me actually ask this: what position did you primarily play?
First baseman.
You were first baseman.
First baseman. Yeah.
You're not. I usually think of taller.
Sure. Yeah, I was not great. I mean, I was a really good defender. I was an okay hitter. I just was steady Eddie. I could hit 2, 3 in the lineup, put balls in play. Didn't run great, but I could pick it at first base. I was a pretty good defender. I took a lot of pride in my defense.
Okay. Nice.
But I was not ever all conference. I'm not going to be in the Randolph Macon Hall of Fame because of my accolades on the baseball field. I just was an average college baseball player.
You go win a national championship, you'll be in the Hall of Fame.
Probably, but not because of my playing skills.
No, I understand. So was the idea that you were going to be involved in baseball after college?
Well, again, I was a political science major at Randolph Macon and had a really close relationship with Bruce Unger at the time, who was
his wife was my kindergarten teacher.
Yeah, he was awesome. Earl Kuntz was my advisor, but Bruce Unger was my was my go-to at Randolph Macon, and he was a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan. Absolutely loved Roy Campanella. And he had pictures in his office. You'd walk into Bruce Unger's office, and there would be a Hebrew National hot dog umbrella there, and that's where he'd do all of his advising. And
really,
when you went in to talk to him about school, which I needed all the help I could get, he wanted to talk about baseball. But I remember talking to Bruce as a student, and he just was enamored with my knowledge of baseball and just my passion that was evident to him. And he just said, you'd be a good coach, and I always took that he and another coach from my junior college days. So when I graduated from Randolph Macon with a political science degree, I'm like, and I remember Bruce Unger saying, what are you going to do next? I didn't have the grades to go to law school. Yeah, he had connections with the NSA and some other organizations, but I didn't really see a future for myself in that. And so I actually left Randolph Macon and took a job in the front office for a minor league baseball team in Bowie, Maryland. The Bay Sox, who now play against the Squirrels in the Eastern League.
They're still there. Yeah,
still there, and worked in the front office for them. And it was very much a business, marketing and promotions and sales. And I liked that, but it wasn't quite what I thought it would be in terms of interactions on the field. So I just jumped out of there after a year in the fall of 1998 and made a couple $1,000s and lived in the basement of my then head coach Paul O'Neill over at Shenandoah University. Okay. Only one L, not two, not the Yankees. Paul O'Neill. Yeah. And yeah, the rest is history. Rode his coattails for about 4 or 5 years between Shenandoah and UNC Pembroke, and then was fortunate enough to get back up here when I would just turn 29 years old.
And offered the head coaching job.
Offered the head coaching job, so 7-8 years after I graduated.
That's pretty unusual.
Yeah, very unusual. Very, very fortunate to get that opportunity at such a young age. For an athletic director whose son I was teammates with at Annandale High School. I mean, it's just crazy how life works. There were 4 Canic boys that were at Annandale High School, and there was Frank, who was older than me, quite older, and I never remember connecting with. There was Jesse, who was a year older than me and played football in Annandale and was highly successful, but also played baseball. And then there was Dan, and then there was Mike, who were younger than me, and I didn't really connect. They were lacrosse guys. But Jesse and I were teammates for two years, essentially, for the varsity baseball team. He was an outfielder. I was a first baseman. We didn't interact a lot, but we were fine.
You're on the same team, yeah.
On the same team, but we didn't hang out really after games, and didn't go to the local McDonald's in Annandale and do stuff together. We just kind of were teammates, and so. But I remember during my time in Annandale, his dad being an administrator at Georgetown. Again, I was a kid. I didn't know on what level or who he was or what he did, but I just knew he was at Georgetown. So fast forward to April of 2004, I get the Randolph Macon Alumni magazine, and Dennis Canic is the new athletic director at Randolph Macon.
From Georgetown
to Randolph Macon. So I called my high school coach, and I said, Dennis Canic, isn't that Jesse's dad? He said, sure is. So I sent just a very innocent email at the time, congratulating him, telling him who I was, reminding him that I was teammates with Jesse. And that was that, very innocent. And in turn, he sent me an innocent response. Thank you, Ray. Nice to hear from you. Jesse remembers you and is doing well. He's currently an attorney and was an attorney up in D.C. at the time, Jesse, that is. And that was that. And then Bruce Unger reached out to me that summer, probably August. And at the time, Bruce Unger was the acting provost.
Bruce Unger was something more than a mentor to you, it sounds like.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, he really he was the greatest impact, with all due respect to Coach Waters or Billy Flowers or some of the people that I got to know at Randolph Macon. Bruce Unger was exceptional to me. He reached out as the acting provost at the time and just said, hey, Coach Waters is stepping down. And, of course, I'm indebted to Coach Waters for the opportunity he gave me. And we weren't particularly close after I graduated, but, we stayed in contact periodically. But Coach had stepped down for some health reasons, a little bit unexpected. So here I found myself reaching back out to Dennis Canic again. And now I was having other people reach out to Dennis Canic again, somebody I knew from Georgetown and the AD from UNC Pembroke. And so long story, a little bit shorter. I ended up getting the job at Randolph Macon, and I don't know how much time had passed. It wasn't long, but I was sitting in Dennis's office at the time, and he said, you know what made the difference for me? And I'm thinking, oh, well, I knocked the interview out of the water, or I did this, or I did something really great. He said, no, none of that, and that's all great. He said, when you emailed me in April, I reached out to Jesse, and I brought your name up, and Jesse said nothing but good things about you. And
he could have trashed you.
Yeah, he could have. I mean, who knows? But essentially, what Dennis was saying is, my son had nothing but good things to say about you. yeah, Ray was a good guy. Now, this is when we're 17, 16 years old.
Yeah.
But I'm glad I was nice to that guy because, essentially that was what meant the most to Dennis. Now, yes, the Pete Wilk from Georgetown calling or these other people reaching out on my behalf were nice. But the fact that his son had positive experiences with me in high school went a long way. And I think that little innocent email, I really had no underlying – I wasn't trying to do anything there. I just was, congratulations. Hey, I'm at UNC Pembroke, and I went to school with your son, and I'm coaching now, and I'm in the industry now, and it just that's how I ended up, getting to Randolph Macon.
And when you got there, you'd been there a couple seasons. Was the idea that you were going to stay for as long as you have?
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I had chances as an assistant coach. While I was an assistant, both at Shenandoah and Pembroke, I had head coaching opportunities in the Valley, in the Shenandoah Valley League, and had some offers from those times, coaching players from various schools across the country. To one in particular was the College of Charleston. After the summer of 2002, we won the championship, and I had a really good experience with 2 or 3 players from that program. And I remember at the time, John Pulowski, former major leaguer, was the head coach, and Scott Foxhall was his assistant. And I remember Fox calling me. They had a part-time position open, cutting grass and coaching baseball. And that was probably the closest I came to going down that Division I rabbit hole. But since I've been back in Ashland, there have been moments and there have been opportunities to have conversations. But I like to think I'm a quality of life coach. I heard somebody say that one time. I'm quality of life over career. I certainly love winning and having resources available to win, but I also like being a husband and a father. And my wife is, very involved in the community and with the local domestic violence shelter, and has done exceptional work for that organization and really grown that support for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. And I know she's in her element, and she's been in the PTA and all kinds of other things as our kids have grown up. So there's always been conversations, not always, but there have been some conversations at times about opportunities elsewhere. But we like where our feet are, and we've established deep roots in Ashland, and it's paid dividends, I think, for our family.
Yeah, I mean, I have to remind myself from time to time that my most important job is probably as a parent,
right?
Then as a spouse, and then as whatever endeavor brings a couple bucks in. Yeah. So I'm always fascinated by coaches who have to wear many, many hats, right? You're a practice coach, you're a game coach, you're a recruiter, you're an administrator. You wear a lot of hats. I think a 2-part question, really one question, but 2 different parts of the year. I'd love to hear day in the life, one day, one game day, what that day's like for you, and then a day off season where you're doing, let's say, heavy recruiting. What a heavy recruiting.
Well, I
day
think,
would look like.
and one thing you just kind of hit on, the different hats at a school like Randolph Macon. Those hats just aren't necessarily around your program. I've worked every fall for the last 18 years as the games manager for home football games. That's been my secondary responsibility. And, 15 years ago, it was great. But now that I have a older family and kids that are active and engaged, it's not quite as appealing when I have to devote 5 to 8 Saturdays in the fall, especially as Coach Arruza's team continues to. I mean, last year they played to December 10th.
Right.
They played well into the season and hosted a vast majority of those playoff games. So, the off season really isn't. Yes, there are commitments to baseball, recruiting, of course, and then player development, but there's the secondary responsibilities of games management, and then as it relates to our program, it's the weight room development piece, it's the academic progress piece, making sure the students are staying on track academically and using the resources at Randolph Macon, like the professors, engaging in positive, not hiding behind a screen, a phone, or a computer tablet, but just actually, talking with people and teaching them life skills related to relationship building. Fundraising is a huge part of what we do in terms of enhancing the resources that we have available budgetarily. Community outreach, I mentioned what Sheree, my wife, is a part of, but I've also become very close with the police department and was very close with Doug Goodman when he was a chief, and now I'm with the new chief and Troy. I've worked on a relationship there, and several of the officers that I've gotten to know over the years. One of my former players is an officer there now with the Ashland Police Department, so doing a lot with them in the community, particularly over the holiday season. So, when September through December rolls around, a small piece of it is baseball, but a lot of it is these other things that I've talked about that have very little, if anything, at times to do with baseball. Just being ingrained in the campus community, serving on committees, academic communities, things of that nature. And then in the spring, your focus is more on baseball. Excuse me. And that is of course practicing 6 days a week by and large. And then once the season gets going in February, it just depends on if we're a home or road team. But we manage a lot of the day-to-day on our own. So typically getting to the ballpark, if you've got a 12 o'clock game, the kids are usually out at the field by about 9:30, 9:40 for stretching and BP, roughly 2 hours before the game. So that being said, I'm typically at the field by 7 at the campus rather by 7:30, maybe 8 o'clock on a good day. But responsible for getting the locker room set up for the umpires. The night before, I'm typically in the locker room putting out uniforms. I still wash and launder all of our game uniforms.
Do you have any assistants?
I do, but uniforms are not inexpensive. And my assistants do yeoman's, and they do a great job. They recruit. They spend time getting scouting reports ready. So I'm not overlooking what they do. I'm just talking specific to me.
Yeah.
They will help with the day-to-day laundry, but uniforms, I know what the costs are in uniforms, and I have a system in place of scrubbing and soaking and scrubbing and soaking and making sure the chemicals are right. So
this is a great D3 story.
Yeah, this is so the night before, much to my wife's chagrin, I am typically in there handing out uniforms in the lockers, hanging the jerseys in the lockers, and then the next day it's 7:30, 8 o'clock before a 9:30 arrival on the field, and do I have Uncrustables for the umpires, drinks for the umpires, making sure their locker room, which is typically Pedro's space. It's usually the football locker room.
Yeah.
So have the umpire space set up, make sure game balls are in there for them, put the flag up, turn the scoreboard on, drag the field, put the water the field, make sure the screens are set up. Now, typically
I had no idea.
Yeah, typically the players will come out and help manage the screens and that kind of thing. But it is not just to show up and things happen. We've got to get everything lined up for the show to go on for sure. And then Coach Arruza's team typically helps with in-game responsibilities, chasing foul balls or crowd control or things of that nature, as we do. And as I mentioned, it's being the game manager for his, our players will work tickets and security for his home games. So it's the small college life.
Yeah, that's wild. I had no idea.
Yeah.
My impression of D1 is the coaches are just recruiting, thinking, and coaching.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is I've had conversations with a lot of my friends in the Division I world. One of the most colorful conversations I've ever had is with Mike Rhodes, who is now the basketball coach at Penn State. But right. Mike has a history in this area at Randolph Macon and at VCU. But I remember when Mike was at Randolph Macon, and we would joke about what's harder, Division I or Division III, and I think Mike would tell you if he was here that there's a lot that goes into running a high level Division III program, and I can remember when he was at Randolph Macon, him wiping the floor himself during a game, or cleaning out the trash cans, the lining of a trash can, on a practice day, or mopping his floor, doing the running the mop across. And it's the same thing with baseball. I think to run a high level Division III program, one would argue that is harder than running a Division I program where your priority is recruiting and coaching. You have all the other support people in place
right.
to help you with academics, to help you with fundraising, to help you with whatever you may need help with, and your primary responsibility is to recruit and to coach. Now, the level of stress in that job is far greater. You're paid much, much more, and there's a higher level of expectation. It's a business, where you take the business model out of Division III, and it becomes more relationship based and more personal. But to run a high level program, you have to still try to emulate what you see at the Division I level. And to do that, you have to invest a lot more time to make those things happen and provide for your student athletes.
So you've got guys that were in your program, players, I mean, that are married, have kids.
They're bringing kids to camp. I've got kids coming back to camp. They're 7, 8, 9 years old. Yeah, it's crazy.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's great though, because that's you coach. It's a relationship business, and you coach to help these young men go from being dependent on their families when they leave home to being independent when they graduate. And when they graduate, you feel like you've accomplished something when you get calls for advice, or when you get wedding announcements or birth announcements, or those type of things, or I should say wedding invitations. And that's where you really feel like you've made an impact. And so when players start bringing their kids back to camp, that's a check in the win column for you.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
When you think about recruiting, what's your approach to recruiting without giving any Ray Hedrick secrets away?
No, there's no secrets to it. I think life is about relationships, and as I just mentioned, and I think you have to be able to. These families have to see that you are invested in the student athlete that you're recruiting, and they have to see that there's real value in that relationship. And one of the best pieces of advice I received was from a high school friend of mine, Pete Snitzer, back when we were still playing ball, and he had a summer league experience in a summer league. And the guy that he played for in that summer league in that town was, in his opinion, terrible. He was very self-motivated, very professionally driven, and was very clear to the players that played for him that if you don't do well, I'm not going to get my next job. And no one wants to play for somebody like that.
Nobody on earth.
But that was, and I hadn't even really entertained coaching at that time. But I remember early in my coaching career, before I was a head coach, Pete bringing that up to me and saying, just remember, you have to be in it for the players. That's how you're going to get the most out of your coaching experience. And that has stuck with me for a vast majority, if not all, of my career. And I've always maintained a player specific approach to coaching. In the Valley League, I did that. I felt like it was my job in the Valley League to help players go from being where they were in May when they left their respective school to being better in September. And if I was doing a good job, then we were going to win. And we were fortunate in 2 of my 3 years to play for a Valley League championship, win one in 2002, lose a deciding game in 2003. Was fortunate enough to coach some high-level players. Chris Ray from the center of the universe played for me after his freshman year at Wayman Mary.
Oh, wow.
So that relationship has been ongoing for a long time. But as it relates to recruiting and to your question, I really invest time in the families when they come to Randolph Macon. And while my assistant coaches, who I don't mean to overlook, do a really good job of establishing the relationship and building the trust and the interest in the school, I'm kind of the closer that comes in and just reassures mom and dad that it's going to be hard, and not so much the baseball, but the relationship piece, because relationships are arguably the hardest jobs that we have in life. And certainly being married and raising kids are the 2 hardest jobs arguably in life. But I'm going to invest everything I can into that child's experience, regardless of playing time or statistical success or lack thereof. And so for me, that's the key to recruiting, especially at our level, is, hey, I'm going to care. I'm going to be there. Please don't let playing time and be an indication of whether or not I value your kid, because to be quite honest with you, it is my closest relationships are probably more so with the lesser players and the kids that have contributed statistically less in our program over the years than our elite players. Not to say that I don't have good relationships with some of our all-conference, all-region, all-Americans, several of our professional players over my time that I still stay in contact with, but the kids that invested 4 years into a program with limited statistical success, like, I just see value in those kids and the dedication level and the sacrifices they make, even though they're not seeing necessarily the results that they may want personally. So everything is relationship driven in recruiting, and reassuring that mom and dad that I'm going to do everything I can to make sure they're independent and successful when they graduate.
Well, I think something to those kids that don't contribute statistically as well, they clearly love the sport, and,
right.
And there's something that draws you to those kind of kids.
Right, just the investment that they make and the time that they spend, and we too, as a coaching staff, have to show equal investment, even if we may not see them playing or or contributing at a level that they may want to contribute.
Yeah, makes sense. Do you recruit in the Mid-Atlantic area, or is it bigger or smaller than that?
I'd say Mid-Atlantic is a fair scope. Obviously, the Richmond area is first and foremost. We're in a state that doesn't have a lot to offer in terms of baseball opportunities outside of Division I or Division III. There are a few more junior college options now than there were when I was playing, but there aren't much in the way of many Division II. You've got a couple HBCUs that offer baseball, and you've got a couple schools out in southwestern Virginia that offer baseball at the scholarship level, Division II, but not schools that we would typically recruit against. So most of the schools that we're recruiting against in Virginia are your smaller Division I's: Radford, VMI, William and Mary, in some cases VCU, Longwood, a lot of times. So we want to make sure that we attract the best players we can from the greater Richmond area. So that may go up to Caroline, that may go over to to New Kent, King William, obviously Prince George, and of course Hanover, Henrico, and Chesterfield. But that's our foundation. And then beyond that, we will certainly, extend in other parts of the state up into Northern Virginia, over to Virginia Beach. Don't do as much in the Valley because there's so many schools offered in the Valley, from Shenandoah to Eastern Mennonite to Bridgewater. And not to say that we've got a young man coming from right in the backyard of Shenandoah, or rather Bridgewater this year, but we will expand up into parts of Pennsylvania and Delaware, and in some cases New Jersey. We've had kids from Connecticut, North Carolina a little bit. There are a lot of schools to choose from in North Carolina, so probably less than 10 in 20 years from North Carolina, but some key contributors in those 10 years. We have one of our former players that graduated in 2020 whose brother just finished his time with North Carolina up in Omaha. So they did a nice little recap, or a little blurb, I should say, in one of the Carolina games at the College World Series. Daniel Wilkerson was our player that finished in 2020. Well, he's now on staff for Carolina for their baseball team.
Oh, that's cool.
He's in operations. Colby Wilkerson was his brother, who's the shortstop for Carolina. So in one of their first games, they showed Daniel on the bench and talked about his experience playing in the Division III College World Series at Randolph Macon, and now the family has come full circle. Now they're at the Division I World Series with his brother Colby. So that was
neat.
pretty cool.
That's really neat.
Yeah. So there's a good example of a kid from North Carolina who came up here and was quite impactful.
Are you going to coach till you can't coach anymore physically, you think?
No, I see a administrative future, if the opportunity presents itself. We have such a great administration at Randolph Macon, and Jeff Burns has been a lifer there since he stepped on campus from his freshman year in Baltimore, when his freshman year from Baltimore. So I don't know that there's necessarily going to be a high-level administrative role, but I could definitely see a future. That was, again, another thing that Dennis Kannick talked about. What he enjoyed about being an athletic director was coaching coaches and having an impact on the development of young coaches and helping them, move forward in their careers, both at Randolph Macon and potentially beyond. And that always stuck with me, just the opportunity to maybe coach coaches and let somebody else at 29, 30, 31 kind of take over a program and have an opportunity to do what I've done. So if I'm afforded that chance at Randolph Macon, I think that would be something that I would be interested in doing, just because it would be a different experience for me, a different challenge.
But still coaching.
But I'd be coaching coaches.
Yeah. Do you have a relationship with high school coaches?
Yes,
in the
typically.
area?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's your relationship with Tony Simondera, who I know?
Love him.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Tony and I have become closer as of late because one of his former players, one of our players, passed away unexpectedly back in December of 2022. Harrison Coble was somebody we recruited out of high school. Harrison went to Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, out of high school, and then came home after a less than great experience up at Pittsburgh. But Harrison was with us in the fall of 2022. He was a St. Chris grad. We've had several St. Chris grads and currently have St. Chris grads in our program. But unfortunately, Harrison passed away in December of 2022, and that forced Tony and I to spend a lot of time together, managing that, both from a St. Christopher's and a Randolph Macon standpoint, and having a collective approach to it, to manage the student athletes. So we have grown closer over the last 24 months. He just sent me an email. He just won his 500th game. I was part of the celebratory, the congratulatory social media thing that they did. Brian O'Connor, all the coaches in the state that sent a congratulatory.
I didn't
message.
see any of that.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
I just did a recording like this. Hey, congratulations, big guy. One of those type of things, and with my phone, and sent it over to the person that coordinated it. And Tony actually just sent me an email. Because there was an article, I think might have been in the Times-Dispatch, about Griffo Farrell from UVA, the shortstop.
I'm very aware because I played with his dad, who played shortstop at St. Christopher's.
So Griff and Harrison were very close. We called Harrison H, but they were very close, and there was an article about Griff, and I think it was the RTD, but it talked about Harrison, so Tony forwarded it over to me and said, I don't know if you saw this, but it made me think that we need to collaborate again on. We're going to dedicate the press box and some other things on campus to that they're going to be building soon to H, and I just want to get together on something. And H would have graduated next year with that graduating class. So Tony and I are working closely to try to do something for the Coble family and for the kids that were impacted.
Yeah, Tony is a very thoughtful guy, and he's one of those guys when you're around him, you're a little bit happier because he's in your presence.
Well, the coolest part of a terrible experience was having meeting with him and trying to build on some positive things. And I found out he's a Philly guy.
Oh boy, is he!
And so we got talking about the Goldberg. The TV show The Goldbergs,
yeah.
And just some of the neat stories that we bounced off each other, and that was neat learning that part about him and his passion for Philadelphia sporting events and teams, I should say. And I've always had I love Philly. I love going up there to watch games. I love Citizens Bank Park. Haven't seen a game at the Link, but I had a chance to see the Spectrum before it was torn down, and grew up watching teams play in the Spectrum. My Capitals as a hockey fan, and all the teams that Billy Cunningham and the Sixers, Moses Malone, Dr. J, Maurice Cheeks, all those guys as a young kid.
Those guys were awesome.
Yeah, but the Spectrum, the Broad Street Bullies. I never got to see a game in the Spectrum, and I got to see the building. It was a core of it. It was it wasn't much left, but I got to see the building before they tore it down. So. But Tony, sharing those stories with him and hearing him talk about Philadelphia sports was pretty neat.
Yeah, he's a fantastic guy. He's been on this podcast once and the sports thing a couple of times.
Yeah, really neat guy, and I imagine our relationship will continue to grow as we collaborate on some things in H's memory.
Yeah, and you both love baseball too.
Yeah, and I think we both love people.
Yeah, no, you're both very people oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can confirm that because he was my assistant coach when I was a senior in high school.
Yeah.
That's how old Tony is.
That's really cool. That's neat that he's been able to, not to call you old, but that he's been able to impact people for that long. That's pretty neat.
He's been doing it, I think in 3 years, it'll be 40 years at St. Christopher's.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Good for him.
Yeah. Great guy to be around. All right, tell me about your family, your immediate family.
Wife, Sheree. We've been married now for 23 years, I think, 2001. So, 23 years in October. Definitely, and I'm a big believer in surrounding yourself with the right people, and that's what I've done really well throughout my life, starting with her, because I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I don't have the greatest skill set in the world, but my wife, my assistant coaches, have always made me better, the people in my life, and she was the first one that I chose to be with, who really makes me better. She is definitely reminds me of things that I need to do, like any good spouse would, and how I can always better myself. But 23 years in October, we'll have been married. She's a native of Wisconsin, actually, but her family moved here in her late middle school years, and so we met over in Shenandoah County in the Valley. I was working at Shenandoah.
Okay.
And we met there. She's always had a passion for nonprofit work, and again has been the executive director for Hanover Safe Place here in Hanover County for the last 18 years, and done an exceptional job.
That's a long time.
Yeah, she is tremendous. She is a grant writer, and she builds up funds and has really taken that organization and that center to greater heights for victims of violence and sexual assault. So she is my go-to. And then my daughter Maris, she was born here in 2006. So our family has grown since we've been in the greater Richmond area and Hanover County. Maris just graduated from Patrick Henry, so she got a PhD. And so,
I haven't heard that one in a while.
She got her PhD. That's new to us. So sorry for anybody who's heard that a lot. Be like, really? We're still using that? Graduated June 1st and is heading to Virginia Tech and has an opportunity potentially to cheer or be some part of some type of athletic fabric there, based on relationships that our family has. And so this is a summer of planning for us, for her, and and the move in and just the transition to college life. She's done a beach week. She's in the span of I think 14 days, she had graduation, she had beach week, she turned 18. She is best friends. You probably know Dave and Meriwether Gilmore.
I know the names.
The Gilmore, yeah. So they've raised their kids in this town. Meriwether works at Randolph Macon currently, but their daughter Meriwether is the youngest of 3 daughters, and so her sister got married. So Maris, beach week to 18th birthday to the wedding over last weekend, and then we had a new member to our family that was brought into the world on Monday. So it's just been a whirlwind for my daughter Maris. She's very excited about all those things. So she'll leave for Tech in the middle of August. And then our son Garner, named after my grandfather, the nickname my grandfather had, not his birth name, but he is 13 and is an avid sports lover like I am, specifically basketball. He's going to Randolph Macon basketball camp this week as we speak. And then, but baseball, he just loves baseball. He's eaten up with baseball, not because I make him be, but because he just wants to be. So, but he's going to be an 8th grader at Liberty and is on track to go to Patrick Henry and also get his PhD. Yeah. So, great family. And then my wife's family, both my grandparents have passed. My mom and my aunt have both passed. So my family is my wife's family. And by and large, I did mention my dad and we stay in contact, but we aren't as close as I am with my wife's family. And they're out in Shenandoah. They're out in Shenandoah County. My in-laws are in Woodstock, and then my brother-in-law lives in Winchester, whose daughter just had a baby. And I have a sister-in-law who lives here in Ashland. Lives behind the theater. Moved here from Stanton probably about 7 years ago. Wow. So she's in the area, and then we have a couple my other sister-in-law lives down in Florida. So. Yeah, I'm living through my wife's family now, primarily.
It sounds like you love them.
I do. Yeah. I mean, I've been in the family for well over 20 years now, including the dating years, probably 25 years, and I know all the secrets. But they're good people. They're really good to me, and have always. I mean, it's just again, my grandparents raised me, so it was just me and them, and I didn't have a lot of sibling support in the house, so. Now to be able to have extended family like I do with my brother and sister-in-laws is really, really neat. And then nieces and nephews, and I have cousins on my mom's side that I stay in contact with. But I was an only child for my mom and my dad, and my dad remarried and had a family and has, I have some extended family through those marriages. But my wife's family are the ones that I'm the closest with and that I connect with the most. And as I mentioned, went up there earlier in the week to Fair Oaks and was there when my I guess I'm a great uncle now, so whatever that's called, a gunkle is what my son told me it's called. So
yeah, you're definitely a gunkle then.
I'm a gunkle. Yeah.
All right, one thing that you learned on the playoff run this past season, the biggest thing you learned. I imagine you learned a few things.
I would say, I'm figuring out how to word it, but chemistry and camaraderie can get you as far, if not farther than talent. If you have athletes that buy in and believe in the standard, believe in the system, then you can have success regardless of how talented your team may be. And don't get me wrong, we have really good players, and you have to be able to get the most out of those players to exceed at a high level. But this was not our most talented team. We had a really good team last year that without grad school, some of our students graduated and went on to play in grad school. We had our top arm from last year's team drafted. So there are a lot of holes to fill into this year. And then as the year gets going, our starting third baseman in the beginning of April breaks his hand, and he was one of our best hitters. And we've got our second baseman and our right fielder that collide and have a concussion, and they're out for 3 to 4 weeks. And, but we didn't miss a beat. And it was just making the right moves at the right time, subbing guys in, subbing guys out. But this group just bought in, and they, I could have told them to do a lot of different things that would have made sense, and they would have done them because they trusted the process. And we really emphasize the importance of having a solid defense and protecting the baseball. And we were one of the top 5 teams in the country until the World Series to do that, and then we got to the World Series, and I think it just got a little big. The moment got a little big, and
it happens.
It happens, and we haven't been there since 2018, so it was new to all these kids. But it was exciting to see us raise a trophy again. We hadn't done that since 2018, and to be able to, I think we are now on a level playing field. The pandemic impacted people in a lot of different ways, and without having grad school for us, we've been at a disadvantage because kids, even at our level, can go to other programs within the ODAC and play a 5th and 6th year. So we've had to kind of navigate that, knowing that hasn't been an option. So now that we're on the tail end of that, I feel like we're on a much more level playing field and should be able to maintain a consistent level of success. Now, does that mean World Series every year? Clearly not. But, we went to the regional championship in 2016. We're 90 feet away from winning that and going to the World Series in 16. Got to the World Series in 18. We were one bad inning away from playing for a national championship, so we won 3 games on that. And then in 2020, we were number 1 in the country, 15-1, and the season ended for the pandemic. So we were at a pretty consistent level there. And in 2017 and 2019, we weren't awful. We just weren't at that level, but we were still winning 27 to 30 games a year. So, once the pandemic hit and a roster started to be very fluid, and, we were older in 2020, right? We were older in 2021. So some of the programs like Lynchburg, for example, that just won a national championship a year ago, rather, they were all freshmen and sophomores in 2020. So they were able to build in 21 and 22 and 23. We were juniors and seniors in 2020. So a few guys came back in 2021. We couldn't quite replicate what we had wanted to do in 2018 or what we did in 2018. And then it was 2022. We were starting over essentially. And we had a bunch of sophomores and freshmen. And then in 2023, we got a little bit better with juniors and sophomores and juniors. And so I think we're back to a level playing field. But this year was really about just the culture and the standard. The kids laughed at me all the time when I talked about the standard, but it's a standard that Hugh Stevens set for his time at Randolph Macon and Greg Waters maintained. And now it's our job to meet that standard, and that we did so with a really good group of kids who bought in.
Congrats on a great season.
Thank you.
I appreciate you doing this. You've completed the trifecta for me. Randolph Macon.
I'm glad that you saved the best for last, so I appreciate that.
I hope Josh and Pedro listen to this.
I will make sure they do.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts. We'd also really appreciate if you'd rate and review us. You can find us at scodupodcast.com.